if you want kind of like one unified experience that is faster than TypeScript or safer than TypeScript, and the communities kind of like bring better quality engineers, it is OCaml. I don't think I know any other language that does this. So yeah, I'm David Sancho. I'm living in Andorra now, but I'm from Spain. I work for a company called ahrefs. Nobody knows how to pronounce the company name, but we do SEO things. So we are a tool that scrubs the internet and collects data and marketers. I'm working mostly on the tooling team, where I maintain a little bit Melange and a little bit all the tools related for front-end and backend integration. So I'm working on a CSS processor. I'm working on a React implementation in OCaml. I'm working on like all the type safety between the two layers. So that's why my day-to-day has been looks like. I'm working on open source mostly. So that's like almost like kind of like a perfect dream job.
That's cool. Maybe before we go too much into OCaml, I'm really curious. How did it happen? Like, do you have some cool CTOs and cool people who understand how tech works and people should be working on tooling, getting paid for tooling open source? Just how?
Yeah, so the company is cool. So the company is very tech focused. Like my CEO and my CTO are very technical. They like you can see my CEO joining a thread in Slack, just saying how we should optimize this table, this index, and then the afternoon he can be, I don't know, discussing HR, discussing any product. So he's very technical and he loves the technical part. My CTO is kind of the reason why we're doing OCaml. We started all our backend services in I think in PHP. I was not there, but I've been told they were PHP. And then eventually the scrapper, like the part that is more important, the CTO decided to be OCaml. So and then kind of spread it everywhere. They choose a language that was expressive and fast enough. So at the time, I think there was like no other contender. Maybe there are others, but I think that was the decision of my CTO. And then at some point we said, okay, if the backend is on OCaml, the frontend needs to be on Reason, or which they are siblings or whatever. So that's how we end up having like kind of a gigantic company on a niche programming language.
So what's the deal with being siblings? So I know there is OCaml on the back end, and then, but what's the reason?
So Reason was a project that tried to bring OCaml to more people. So the author, Jordan Wolf, the same person that did React.js, he wanted to put more people, like put that type checker into more hands, right? That was like he thought that this type checker could bring a lot of type safety and a lot of good things to the world in general. So he tried to solve one of the first barriers, which is syntax, from his experience, right? If the world has learned JavaScript and C kind of languages, if you put some um, syntactic sugar on top of OCaml, then you would have a bunch of people trying OCaml, and you're gonna first like go pass through the syntax and then learn the semantics and then get completely hooked into the language. I think that's the hypothesis, and it worked decently well, I would say. I think the plan could have been more successful in terms of long term, maybe. And there's all this drama of like all the languages, like a fork of a language, rescript, people getting mad, people joining and leaving like leaving companies, like all this drama is there. But I think the original idea has been kind of dismiss it, like getting smaller over time, because TypeScript I think has been like gaining all the adoption, gaining all the like just getting everybody into TypeScript. I think that's what got um, any other language super small.
And is it like, so that means I think before even Reason existed, it was possible to compile OCaml to JavaScript, right? So it was this
Correct.
whole buckle script thing, I guess, right?
So
Or
yeah, there are two compilers to JavaScript. One is JS of OCaml, the one that more close to the compiler, I think that's 15 years old. I think this project got forked and it became backend. So it was like kind of like technical differences and more aggressive into how much how much of the compiler it owns. Yeah, the idea was like as earlier you compile, as more expressive you have on the output. So yes, OCaml has like big bundle sizes, hard to debug. You need to implement linking and backend or Melange or Rescript, all of those like own way more onto the compiler pipeline. So you can have per
Mm-hmm.
module compilation, very perfect almost handwritten output, and, and integration with all the JavaScript ecosystem. I think those are the three selling points.
I think before we go too much into JavaScript and Melange, I'm still kind of curious on the syntax side. Like, how do you? I'm not sure if you can talk about your production services or maybe in general how people do it. Do you have a mix of Reason and OCaml syntaxes?
Yeah.
Is it kind of per service that people do, or is it usually you have Reason in some places and then more serious services are in OCaml, or like how, or you just fully do Reason and that's it? And how mentally when you work on two projects which are quite similar but kind of different, how do you mentally switch and remember what syntax is which?
Yeah, very good questions. I know that you're a man of taste because you really care about syntax. So that's obviously important. Um, so it's per like front end is on Reason, backend
Mm-hmm.
is on OCaml. I think that's the general
Mm-hmm.
general rule. But now, like
Uh-huh.
over time, that's kind of like organically becomes a mess. The boundary is not really clear because the languages can be like one file can be OCaml, the other file can be Reason. There's no bigger difference.
Uh-huh.
So kind of like naturally things that got shared started with Reason, then we moved to OCaml. So
Mm-hmm.
like there's no clear rule. It's more like whoever started the project, it becomes kind of the language of choice.
Mm-hmm.
But switching between one another is very painful. Like it is truly painful. I mean,
Uh-huh.
nowadays you don't write code anymore. Like nowadays, like all the rules are out of the window, of course. But back in the day, when there are like literally syntax differences. So, like to separate two items in a list, OCaml is semicolon, and in Reason is just colon. Sorry, just comma.
Yeah.
So like like just these and the error message for this exact issue is terrible. So you have these tiny annoyances when you're writing these languages.
But
But yeah,
wasn't there one dialect of this that compiled to both server side or like non front end native code and JavaScript with the same syntax? Or is that not a thing
right.
anymore?
So it is a thing. It is a thing. So what we're working now with Melange, or it works as well in JS OCaml, is that one module can be universal. We call it universal. It can be isomorphic. I don't know. I don't really know the name exactly, but it's the idea that you can compile to JavaScript and can run in any Node environment or Chrome or whatever, and you can run in native. So you can run a native executable. So that's more or less how we work in ahrefs, and how I believe that the projects should move forward. One of the things of the syntax is that um, Reason is kind of like lost a lot of momentum, like all the energy of put in Reason, all the conference talks, all the people got super damaged based on the drama of like a fork. Um, and the only remaining amazing feature of Reason was JSX. So JSX is this HTML in in the language as
Mm-hmm.
expressions. So we started in Ahrefs a project called MLX. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
putting JSX on top of OCaml, and we believe that it's 90% what Reason is good. We lose
Mm-hmm.
like all the C syntax, all the kind of baggage, good baggage of this, but we gain like I don't know, one LSP, one OCaml for like one formatter. So we streamline kind of the experience of the language because like this fork, I see like the
Mm-hmm.
conceptual fork, you would need to have Like in every documentation tool, in every tutorial, in every bit of anything, you need to have like a switch. So it became very,
Yeah.
very annoying over time. So that's why we are betting on MLX as 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 good enough syntax, because OCaml syntax is good enough. So that's I think
Hmm.
that's
I'm not sure I completely understood that. So that means, I mean, I understand the MLX thing. It's like the
mhm.
JSX of OCaml, but can you use then the same syntax to write your server-side stuff?
Yep, yep.
Okay, okay. So, and that's what you're doing then. So it's
The use cases are probably type safety. So for example, a router, or maybe validation like JSON encoding decoding, maybe some sort of logic that is very domain specific. Those are and server-side rendering, of course, like sharing components. I think these are the big buckets of universal code, so code that can work on both. They need to have like special rules. Of course, you cannot go to document dot use the DOM APIs, for example. Like things like these are encoded in somehow in the compiler.
yeah. But I mean, that seems super helpful, right? To have one for all the shared data types, at least, right? To write them in the same thing and reuse them, right? And not have to,
Yep.
well, like you say,
Yeah.
right? Like maybe these days it's not that hard to keep them in sync with.
One thing I truly like about OCaml is that there's the idea that you create a type and you can have derivings. These derivings are sort of macros or we call it PPXs, but it's more like the idea that with one type you can express many things. So you can generate
Hmm.
uh, a compile for a compare function, or you can an equal function, or a show function, or a form.
Hmm.
Even though like you can
Oh yeah.
expand how you type, and as well like one that we use, like I don't know, like the most that we use is JSON. So encoding the coding just by annotating something in the types. So like all your types can be encoded everywhere, or there's parts of the backend that we use ClickHouse. We have a ClickHouse PPX, so all the queries from ClickHouse can they check against the types. So like when you get into this kind of like getting type safe every layer, with little tooling, I think that's what gets OCaml very powerful.
Maybe back to the MSX, JSX version, JSX version in OCaml. It's written in OCaml, and OCaml allows you to have like extensions and also compiler capabilities to write it simply and easy. Or
No, OCaml is not extensible in that sense. OCaml is like modular, so it's a fork, and the build system allows to define dialects. So you can say, oh, MLX has this formatter, and this MLX has this.
so
So
it's going to be in
so
separate files. Those are separate
yeah.
files for. But you also still need some special LSP, a special way to highlight this,
No,
or
no, because
not.
like the LSP for OCaml extends, like supports MLX. So see, it's actually funny because the OCaml LSP supports Reason. So yeah, it supports MLX out of box. Same with the formatter. The formatter is a tiny fork on top of OCaml format that formats all OCaml plus the MLX. So those are very like technically are hacky, because it's a fork and you need to maintain when some version updates happens. We have some utilities that have migrations, etc., so it's not as painful. But technically it's hacky, but for the user it's perfect. So the user should not care um, what language is writing. Actually, like for my personal projects, I write MLX everywhere, even though there's no JSX in parts of the code base. I always use MLX because it's the same code. So
Is it, there were also MLI and MLY files in there, I
correct,
think. What are
correct.
those?
So MLI are interface files. So by default, uh, by default, I think it's part of the language. Sorry, it's more like the interface is outside of the module. So the modules are every file of one project is a module, but you can have submodules, so like modules inside modules. And then the interface, you can write it in line, but the interface of the whole file is another file, if that makes sense. So there you can export things, document things. It's a double sword. Is you write it sometimes twice, maybe the methods, but then you are more polite in one, and then you can document it perfectly in one area, and you can click around and navigate and learn the code very fast without reading about the documentation. But on the downside, you need to write it. You need to like the things that you export, you write it twice.
So like maybe this is offensive, but it reminds me a bit of like header files in C or something, right? So like a different file and it has like the signatures of everything.
For
No?
me, they're more like, for example, in Elm or in Haskell, you write twice the method, right? Like, and then the first declaration is you have the type annotations. It's the same concept, but just in another file.
Okay,
So,
I see.
so in one file, you only have types. You only have the things that you can see from outside, and the type can be a function, of course, but no implementation.
Okay,
How does it work day to day? Like when you have a signature and you want to implement this, does the language server kind of hint you or what the type is, or do you need to go back and forth and check and remember?
You usually it type checks, but usually you create implementation and then you have like a button, say generate interface, and then it's like pam,
Okay.
and then you clean up the things that you don't want to expose. So yeah, the integration is quite nice. The good thing is that if the interface doesn't change, the build system doesn't recompile the file. So that's very efficient when you have like one standard library, one core library of your project, and you touch this and you want to recompile kind of everything. But if you're working kind of an edge of your application, then you don't need to recompile everything. So
I'm kind of curious about the React parts because I mean, use it from PureScript, and
how
I
does
think
PureScript go with React? That's I'm not aware of that.
So there is no kind of JSX like thing. So
right, but the integration is very seamless. No, you write PureScript and you are actually running React, right?
yeah, I mean, in the end, JSX is also just uses this React create element stuff under the hood, right?
Yep.
And we just have something that also uses that, but you don't write that every time. So let me see if I can. So it's like this, right? This is a very simple one, but you say div,
right?
And then you put the arguments, and then you put the children. This is a bit of a weird one, not FFI'd properly. Should be more like, yeah. I mean, this should also be like something else, a bit like this, right? So, and then it's nested just by being inside of this child thing. So no X thing. I was actually wondering about that because I was thinking, shouldn't be too hard with an agent, right? To just do something like this.
Right.
But then I'm not a huge fan, to be honest, of like XML or HTML stuff because of all the closing tags, and I find that
I think if I'm willing to die on a hill, I think it's JSX. Like that for me, that's the boost, because the feature that you don't have with the function calls is that you don't know when you have like a nesting ending, you don't know which parenthesis or which bracket is coming from. So you don't have the concept of a box, right? You can maybe collapse and then kind of interact, but you don't know when a big element finishes. And when you have this
I mean, you kind
element
of
that
know.
finishes,
I know from the indentation, so that I don't mind too much. So I could scroll up. But for me, it's the opposite, right? It's like, oh, I want to change this from a div to a span, and then I have to find the stupid closing thing, and then the tooling can do it for you. But no, and that's the thing, right? Like that's why I was wondering, maybe I should do it because you never know if it's kind of Stockholm syndrome at some point, right? Where you're like, oh, I actually like this way better, but maybe that's because I've been doing it for 5 years like this, right? And then maybe it would be nice to have the other thing. But the one thing that always worries me is also why I don't like it in JavaScript or TypeScript is that at least there the stupid curly braces are so overloaded, right? So you want to say on click and then you put curly braces because you want code inside, but then maybe it's a prop that takes an object and then you open another curly brace and now it means something completely different, right? Or maybe it's just the body of a function. So in that sense, at least there, I don't find that very beautiful, but maybe there's a way. I'm kind of curious if you have that, like how it looks for OCaml.
For OCaml looks fine because like the syntax is very minimal. So we have parentheses somewhere only when it's needed, but most of the syntax kind of goes away. But then when you realize where like what's what, at some point, like I don't know, maybe 1 week or even less, maybe you start parsing it so fast, then it becomes silly. So
I'm wondering, like, so if you have a handler, like some on-click thing or something, how do you then kind of break out from your HTML like syntax in OCaml?
so in OCaml you write parentheses. So
Just
you write
regular
in parentheses.
parentheses?
Yeah. And
Okay,
that
yeah, that's
is an
nice.
expression. So that can be a function, a value, a module, a function application.
Yeah, that's nice already that it doesn't. Or do you,
Yeah.
do you have records in OCaml actually?
Yeah. We have
So
like
you
yeah.
and they use curly braces like JSON?
We use curly braces, yeah.
Okay, see, yeah, so that's nice then. At least these
And
are
I
two
think that
different
it's
things.
the only place where OCaml use curly braces. Yeah.
Yeah, so that, yeah, then that's much nicer, I think, because that is something that I find interesting in that. I mean, it's also I don't think there's. I think probably Jay and I are more than like we're the majority of people who use that React stuff in the world these days. So
Right.
it's not like you say you do this like this in PureScript, right? Because maybe they have their own bindings that do it their way. But whenever I have to do something in like TypeScript or JavaScript, I'm always surprised how hard it is to do React stuff with that language. So, for
Okay.
example, if you want to just check an object for equality, I don't even know how you do that, right? Like you can, I don't know, you loop over it or you like define it every time. And then, so that is tricky. And of course you can quickly check if they're not the same with like maybe reference equality, but at some point that
Right.
gets really hard. And then there's other stuff like just even updating something, right, without mutating
Right.
it. And I think that's then like, because I never understand, they always talk about like state management and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, why do you need that? Like, you have a use state, right? Just use state. But I suppose that's the reason. Do you like have more insight, or you just don't know because you only use only use a reasonable language?
I mean, in JavaScript, I think when you look at JavaScript from another language, you see all what's missing. No, like you see it as a or what the potential that it could have become. That is because ABC, like your preferences, are not there. And what you're saying exactly is like when you need to update a field that is like 3 levels nested in objects. In Ocaml is cute. I think in other languages are the same. Even I know Elm, you can have lenses. So like the problem space is kind of like everywhere. I think in Haskell you can have lenses as well, and so but it is this thing where if you start doing it from scratch in JavaScript or in TypeScript, there's a library that does that for you. So that there's an I think the solution of JavaScript is always kind of the painfully correct one, which is there's 7 implementations. There's 7 solutions that are kind of the same but not equal. But when you are in this ecosystem, it makes total sense. If you look it from the outside, JavaScript doesn't make any sense. Like it literally makes zero sense. But just because like you are used to the good things of your language, so like in OCaml you have pattern matching, for example. Pattern matching I think is the knife that you can cut everything. Is the laser side like sword, no? Like you can kill everybody. You can do anything, and it's super powerful. You can nest them. And if you go to JavaScript and you nest switch statements, that doesn't pass the pull request. Like not even AI writes that. So uh, for me, it's always funny because I, I've been doing maybe JavaScript for maybe 10 years, and then I learned kind of another language in deeply 4 or 5. So I think I love both. It's kind of like, of course, JavaScript is kind of like the child that it kind of got into drugs and it kind of does things that goes well, and the OCaml is kind of the academic one that goes into places and it's more solid. But I try to love both, I think.
I think I got into this because you were saying that I think the fork that you are using of OCaml was started or at least influenced by the creator of React, right? Or at least there was
Yep.
one fork, and I just find that so interesting that I feel like it's really, especially React, I find works really well with a functional language Whereas I wouldn't say that in general. I mean, I don't know that many other frameworks that they have, but I've looked at a few things, and I think they're kind of more suited to React, to JavaScript sometimes,
Yeah,
right? Because some of them you can mutate
yeah,
things, and then there's something that, like, I don't know, maybe it monkey patches it for you so that when you mutate it, it like has a hook on it. I don't really know how it does it, but I just find, especially for React, I find it interesting how well it suits all the functional programming stuff. So just not to say that JavaScript is a horrible language, although I mean there are some parts which are quite questionable, but like especially in combination with React, I really find it.
yeah. Composition purity. I think those get you into places, and I think you can find it on Elm. You can find it probably in PureScript. So all these concepts are truly what made React alive, or like what defined React. So it is very easy to bind to React or use React with another language like this, and it can be painful to use any sort of other UI library, Vue.js or something like that, where that paradigm doesn't even fit. So
Yeah. So what is this Melange thing then?
So Melange is this compiler that started as a fork of AggleScript, and it tried to remain with the promise of like one file in OCaml can be compiled to JavaScript, because the previous project was like, okay, let's break compatibility with OCaml. We don't need this ancient programming language, whatever. We're gonna make it better, which is fine. But like the idea of Melange was, let's keep the compatibility, because at the time we have like a big community of people, or at least a lot of libraries, a lot of projects that were like, the promise was you're gonna do universal things. You can run natively super fast, and then you can compile to JavaScript. The promise got a bit broken, so Melange kind of like revived it, and then ahrefs at the time we had all the front end. So we just hired the person that or hired our sponsor, whatever, but they started working for us, and then we got into kind of like a decent place where you can compile all the front end for ahrefs, which might be, 6, 7, or 8 million lines of code. So it's a big chunk, and that, I think, the team of the front end, I think, might be 40 people. So like everybody kind of like developing their in a monorepo. So once we reached that point, I think Melange got mature. I think that was like 2 or 3 years ago, so long time ago.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. That's what you're using mostly then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a quick side question. How fast is the compilation speed? Like huge monorepo. How fast is CIs with all of this? Is like OCaml and Melange tooling pretty fast?
Yeah, common tooling is very fast. I have been doing some Rust recently, and I cannot believe how slow that is. I've been
Okay.
told uh, by one common friend that PureScript is kind of slow compiling.
I
So
mean,
so
depends who you're
that's
comparing it to.
yeah. So a small project goes by milliseconds for sure, and then depends. If you touch one of these files that is like maybe super core, and you need to recompile kind of like all the backend, maybe the whole file, like the whole thing without any cache or just code, maybe it's like 20 seconds, 30 seconds maybe. But if it is like one module that you use it on one place, it's like milliseconds. So it's very
Okay.
tiny. And a medium size, it never gets more than seconds. Like it never reaches 2 seconds. Like
No, just it also runs fast, right? So I think that's another thing, is that like runtime speed is
yeah,
among the top for functional languages, I think, right?
yeah. I think we like to say that our garbage collector is very good. I've been to ICFP, and I'm not really kind of an expert at any means in runtime or garbage collection, but I do know that there's crazy smart people working there, and it's evolving. So it's kind of like at some point OCaml got multicore, and then the garbage collector for multicore was a little bit garbage, and then like all the big J3 minds and all the academia minds, and so like people who start polishing a bit more.
So when that lands, does it land in like some? This is the OCaml compiler thing, and then the forks like Melange or whatever, they just kept up, like they fast
There's a,
forward to it, and okay.
there's a tiny layer called ppxlib that does migrations between the AST, because all of this happens maybe on the AST layer, only, or parse tree, whatever. But you have migrations downwards. So like a breakage on that layer is very rare. Happens one every 3 years maybe, and those are very painful because you need to, of course, update all projects. But if they are backwards compatible, and because usually syntax is only additive, so you don't support that part of syntax, that's fine. That's your library or your PPX or Melange or whatever. That can break if you use it, but if not, then you're free to keep updating the compiler.
When you go on Twitter, when you talk to people, you always look at languages and they come with baggage, right? Or some memes, and always they're not pleasant. You look at people, you ask people, why don't you use Scala, for example? And they would be like, oh, there is whatever, this thing, this drama, this stuff. I don't like this. You ask people about PureScript, and people are like, oh, it's not even on 1 point whatever. They have one book. The most typical one is Haskell to academic, right? We already mentioned it in the beginning. And then there is truth to everything, but usually this is where it stops. But when you talk about OCaml, there's not that much. Like there is also, like from outside perspective, there is a bit of fracturing the communities. Kind of there is this prelude and like this standard library and this company, a bit of this.
Yeah.
But it's so minor when you take a look at the multiple backends, and you can do backend and frontend. There's only 2 or 3 ecosystems that can do it, as you mentioned, like Gleam, Elixir, this world. Maybe you could argue for PureScript, but PureScript backend on the backend is, I don't know, not super performant. So you cannot really argue for that. And maybe Clojure and ClojureScript, but it's also a different thing. And then you have OCaml that can do both, and it's fast on both, and it's supported by huge companies, and the huge companies who make a lot of money. And you kind of like, okay, those people are serious. So if they use a serious language, they're serious. So what gives? Like, why it's not used? Why nobody talks about it all the time? Why nobody uses this? You mentioned that TypeScript takes a chunks for everybody, but it's still like, what's up, OCaml?
Yeah, I think the timings are super rough. Like the reason why some languages are famous and some languages are not, I think there's like 100 variables into it, but
Sure.
there's definitely kind of like the incentives of OCaml. I think the incentive of Haskell is to write more papers, no? That's kind of like the meme. And then eventually some companies use it, some big banks use it. Like you see some people that are very passionate that go pass through it. But again, pass through it, right? Like there's a big barrier for both learning the language and as well convincing people to use the language. Because convincing a company or your CTO or your manager or your whatever to use a different programming language, it can be the best decision of your career or maybe, or kind of like one that can destroys your reputation by a lot, or can get you fired, or can get you into this. Oh, we have one service that nobody touches. There's one guy who used to work there that maintain it, and then it's gone. So all the risks, I think, it's a risk management issue. At the end, it's kind of a risk management issue. You want to choose React because it's the most used one. You don't want to use this new one that pop up this week, just because, right? And it has been true for many things. And in order to be so exceptional that crosses the chasm, no, like gets this momentum of okay, everybody's migrating to I don't know, whatever, Scala
Rust.
or like whatever, like Rust, right? Like you need to have insane amount of like both technical, both community, and then kind of like luck, right? And then like and these trifecta or like more parameters to make it, it's very rare. And you see languages with all of these that should be more people writing on them, but there's always one tiny detail. No, Gleam. We mentioned Gleam. Gleam is a amazing language, very good community, growing, 1 point whatever. There's someone who's saying in their company, no, but it's too young, or no, because the actor pattern is so. There's always like one tiny detail that gets too scary, and it's actually a good argument, but it is kind of like these barriers that you need to break, and the only way to break them is if those technologies are 10 times better. I think that's if I'm the CTO of a company and I'm saying, okay, we're going to bet in a language or in a technology that is 10 times better, it's worth it. But I would say.
So it's an easy win for OCaml then, right?
happy to say the hot topic, but it's more like, is PureScript 10 times better than TypeScript, or OCaml 10 times better than TypeScript? Is PureScript 10 times better than OCaml? Like 10 times better, I think is the magnitude that we all kind of more or less imagine how good that thing needs to be, right? So I become less fan of these niche languages because it's probably twice good, which is insane. Like in my view, if you have your company twice, like the core library or core language is twice better than your competence, is insanely good for your business, for your hiring, for like everything. But it's not 10, right? So 10 is what makes this language, like Rust is 10 times better than whatever. So yeah, that's my hot topic.
I have a different take in that I agree that it's probably not 10 times better of a language, but my main reason is always what they kind of cite as a weakness. It's kind of that community thing, because if I find somebody who's really excited and somewhat good at OCaml, I think they're also going to be maybe twice as good as the average people that I would find maybe for JavaScript.
That's a
So
good point.
if you don't pay them more money, then that's a pretty good win, I think. And also motivation. I can tell that from myself, right? Like if I have to write Golang versus when I could write PureScript, I would spend more time for free
Yep.
on these things and lots of things like that. So I agree. Just if you just look at it from the kind of the hard facts, right? That might be an argument, but I always think it's hard to, like, where do you draw the line? Because you could argue that, oh, maybe you get so big and you've used up all the community. There's just nobody who knows OCaml anymore, and so on. Which, I mean,
Yeah, very unlikely
good
because
luck.
like it's got teachers in uni. So
Yeah.
I agree. Like the good part, I think it's like the Python paradox from, I don't know, 20 years
Yeah, yeah,
ago, that
yeah, yeah.
people who learn Python, I think all functional people know this article.
Sorry, I just want to be careful here in this discussion 2026 because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Like these discussions, like you could have them a couple of years ago, but now it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah,
language, 2 times productivity, 10 times productivity, 100 productivity. We realize that it's all yappity yaps. But I want to be more specific.
right.
What I was trying to imply is that you mentioned that for Gleam, you could argue like maybe people are scared of actors, so the language is too young. But what's the one painful point for a camel? That kind of big one? Maybe that's one question. And the bigger question is, what do you think? You can imply this in the beginning with Melange and ecosystem. What's the 10x could be for Camel, and what are you working on the bigger picture? And what could be this like? Okay, wait, maybe not 10x, but 5x, 6x for
Yep.
Camel to be like,
Yes.
okay, let's go there.
For me, is the best language for compiling to both places. It's fast in both places. The tooling is good in both places. I think that's the bet that I'm willing to do. If you want kind of like one unified experience that is faster than TypeScript or safer than TypeScript, and the communities kind of like bring better quality engineers, it is OCaml. I don't think I know any other language that does this. It is not young. It's baked by academia, so the language pushes forward. It is, of course, like functional, but with some escape hatches. So it doesn't get you into way. If you are struggling, you can do bang, a reference, a mutation, and live with it. Like of course, that you are doing it is explicit. Like it's not like you do it on purpose, and it's not, maybe there you have some comments in the pull request, but it is a way to get past through some of the problems that you have, I know, with the world. And I think that's something that I believe, and I still believe, regardless of AI, it is true.
How does that work actually with side effects and so on? You just do them, but it's not idiomatic or whatever, right? So you don't usually do it, but you don't have to write a big unsafe or anything like that, I guess, right? You can just make a reference. You
Yep.
can probably write loops and stuff. Okay, I see.
Yep.
And do you find yourself doing that a lot?
Like, no, because, it's more like, it's similar to what we said about React before, no? Like, when you are into composition purity, you are in this kind of like coding style. It's more like a coding style. You can have some cases where it's very nasty somewhere, but overall, it's very easy to, okay, all the mutations happen in the edges. So our own kind of like coding style, I think it gets you into this. Of course, there's definitely some design or or architecture that needs to be on place to not like shoot yourself in your foot. But to write a script, for example, it's very easy. Like it's very fine to use OCaml. You would not, I would not use maybe Haskell for writing one off a script or thing like this. For OCaml, it's like okay, that's barely decent, fine, and you know where to put the mutations and where to put the side effects. It's not, yeah.
It's similar in Scala because I mean you can have variables, you have loops, and there's nothing stopping you. But like wherever I've worked, even in the worst places, people don't usually use variable like mutable variables and shit. But sometimes maybe in the test they would have like mutable maps or stuff like this, right? But that's about it. So I was just curious because
Yeah, there are some cases that we know, for example, like a mutable context for the parsing, for example, library, or for keeping track of recursivity. Like there are some designs that are kind of make a lot of sense for mutability. If you don't do this, the code is getting super nice. Like it gets super verbose, and then you introduce, I know, a let operator to fix it, and you kind of in this rabbit hole. The mutability is both more performant and cleaner to write, and then you are responsible enough to not leak that outside. So
like you said, I mean, I think people who write OCaml, they're more sensitive to slow things like slow compilation times and slow runtimes and so on. So I was curious if there was maybe kind of a tendency for people to say that, okay, this would maybe be more pure, but I don't really care. I just want it to be faster. So I just do the fast thing. But I suppose it also depends on kind of what you're building, I guess, right? So, and you also said that it's faster than TypeScript. How does that work? Because doesn't it
I
essentially
mean,
become
faster than
JavaScript
Node for
just like
sure.
TypeScript?
Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah,
for
yeah. On the
example,
back end,
like
yeah, for sure.
on the backend for sure. On the front end, I think there has been some, like of course some benchmarks, but it's very minimal. Like overall V8, kind of like the thing that runs, it's optimized for any sort of pattern. It is true that, sorry, for untyped program and a typed program, a typed program is faster in V8. So if you by default use kind of like the same shapes for objects and similar shapes for arrays, etc., overall it's faster. So TypeScript would be as fast as this, and there's tiny optimizations here and there, but it's not a sentence that we it's not true anymore, basically.
Is there any, like you were talking about WebAssembly as well? Is there any? I think that has a
Yep.
garbage collector now, but I don't know if it's the same garbage collector for everything. Do you know
Yeah.
if there's
Actually,
already
the
stuff happening?
spec of WebAssembly is written in OCaml. And yes, we have one compiler for WebAssembly, um, but and I think it is not shipped into. I don't want to say it, but in some browsers, the GC module is not there. Um, but for I think for the most common ones, I think it works. So yeah, I have seen kind of like some prototypes of a Game Boy emulator running Mario on the browser and then on JavaScript and then on native. So like the whole these things. So it is possible. I don't know any big company that is using it. Um,
That's cool. I mean, if you aren't convinced now, I think if you can do Mario in WebAssembly, what else do you want? Pretty good.
yep.
So what are you working on? Like I was trying to allude to it before with a bigger
Right.
picture on the tooling and ecosystem and where you're trying to lead it in the.
Yeah. So my work has been mostly re-implementing React on native OCaml. So the idea that you can do server-side rendering, but as well this new paradigm of server components. So server components are components that only run on the server, can have access to all server resources like file system, databases, logging, everything, because they run on the server. And instead of sending down JSON, sending down, just like transferring down to the client JSON, you transfer down kind of format that is React. This format brings some amazing features such as streaming or such as promise resolving over streaming. So you can say, oh, render everything and keep this part of the application suspending. So like waiting for the backend to resolve the promise or waiting for some waterfall of operations to run while the rest of the operation of the page is interactive. So you can imagine that this is the solution for many tools that you open a website and there's 27 spinners. You open, you click around, and then like data keeps loading and you cannot do much, or even though like maybe there's overfetching. So you open a web page and there's hundreds of pages, hundreds of documents being loaded when you only need to click one button and run away from the page. So server components are a solution to this, and then zero bundle size. So like because they run on the server, you can have, I don't know, markdown, highlighting, code chain, like all your fanciness. You can run on the server, and you could obviously move maybe all the state into the server. So like all these architectures are possible. It is very interesting for href because we have one dashboard that contains like a lot of tools. So my effort was, if I can have this in OCaml, then we can have like full stack, and it's like modern in the sense of you can have parts of the application that are layout. So there's parts of the application that can cache, for example, a shell application. You can cache the user permissions, all these kind of like generic data, and can be cached. So you cannot you only want to fetch it once. You can cache it on like on the backend, or you can put in local storage or whatever, and then every time that you navigate is instant. You can preload. So like if the mouse is getting closer to the sidebar, you can preload. Same, you can have like all parts of the application can be cached by the browser or by cached by the server. So like all these patterns are enabling once you run OCaml on the server. Sorry, that's my cat. So yeah, I think that's what I'm working on, and the project is called Server on React.
Are you doing that stuff like when the mouse is close to the edge of this screen? Are you loading stuff, and so now you already, is that like more
So
theoretical that you could do that, or are you?
we don't have it implemented, but it is a pattern that is used in most front-end frameworks, for example. You can even preload, for example, images, or you can even preload fonts, or you can even preload the data, the endpoints that the user is going to call. So the optimizations are kind of in place in Next.js, for example, which is a framework I know a little bit. And it's are those implementation are those features that when you use the web enough, you realize, oh, this website is way too fast. Like, and those are those small things. As well, like there's all these patterns where you can maybe load data either when the user is idle, and then get kind of like a web worker that serves this data for you and with a cache. So you have like offline first, like all these kind of like technologies, I think are only possible when you're working in a language that it's universal, or Melange and OCaml wants to be universal. You can enable architectures that were not possible before. And I think that's the beauty of it. That's why they pay my salary, I guess. That's why they have me. It's because like there are some solutions that otherwise are not possible, right? You can have one piece of language, so two languages to do one tiny optimization, and then
Yeah. And I don't know. Do you know any other language that could do like server-side React rendering that's not essentially made for that? Like, I suppose there's.
I don't know any. I know that
Yeah.
there's implementations on, I don't know, Go or something, that they have a DSL that looks like React, but my DSL is JSX. So like my DSL is the same on the client on the server. So I think we are unique on that. So yeah, that's the selling point.
Do you still have to write two different? So I haven't tried this server side components or anything like that. Do you still, you kind of write the same JSX for the same component, and then there is some logic that goes to the front end and some logic or some part of it stays on the back end, or you have to write two separate things and then communicate them?
So you write once, and then there are parts of the components, or functions or callbacks or whatever, that they need to be flagged as browser only. So for example,
Uh-huh.
if you have, click of, the click handler or whatever. That's kind of like client only. It's very rare to have like a lot of functionality. So server-side rendering plus like a lot of functionality is kind of like rare. For server
Hmm.
components is completely separate. You cannot have a on click or on whatever.
Hmm.
So all the events are forbidden. So the server components are more what you would call it controllers back in the day in
Uh-huh.
maybe Laravel or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what you guys are familiar, but like what they used to be controllers. So you have like code that is more like data loading,
Yeah.
aggregation, and more permission layers. So yeah,
Don't you usually have some kind of shell? You try to have the outermost thing to be
mm,
mostly like server side stuff because you want the SEO
yeah,
or whatever, right? So that like, and then you kind of, I don't know, is that the word? And you kind of hydrate in all the interactive stuff afterwards, right? So you kind of have slots
yeah,
where you have components that are more client side, I guess, and then they're
yeah.
not necessarily there right away, right? And then, okay, okay.
The architecture for server components makes these slots independent. So the slots are kind of like the tiny bits of your tree. For server-side rendering, you need to hydrate the whole thing, or the previous server-side rendering architecture, you would need to hydrate the whole thing, and that's very tricky because every date or every data that is not the same can crash
Hmm.
or break the hydration. For separate components, you can have only the parts that are client, so only the parts that are interactive. They need to be hydrated, but they can be hydrated separately. So
And is this mostly responsibility on you, on the library author? Like as a normal user, I almost don't have to worry about this anymore, right?
yeah, you should not worry. Like my colleagues, they know, the ones that are interested, they know, but there are people who don't know anything and they are happy. So mostly like I worked or I finished the library itself. Usually this library this how the JavaScript wall is made is like you have this library and then you have like 10 frameworks or I don't know 5 frameworks.
Hmm.
I'm writing the library and the framework, so sometimes it's
Hmm.
is a messy line, no? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
the router. Oh,
Mhm.
can I have this optimization for this case? It's very kind of like I try to be like very I don't know organized, let's say, to not cross the barrier because eventually you could do any sort of application on top or any other backend.
Does that also lead you into having to do stuff like, I don't know what it's exactly called, but like module splitting, right? So stuff where maybe this thing gets used, this client window thingy gets used in different places. So you kind of want to have something that you can cache when you load it from the other page as well, and so on. Is that something you have to worry about too, or is that taken care of by something else?
We use ES build to compile the JavaScript or to bundle the JavaScript. And then there's like, of course, like a plugin that, of course, you can. It's part of the router, so you have some annotations that split the pages automatically. But that's all in the framework kind of problems, right? I think you could write any sort of code, right, in the library, but the framework kind of gives you the, oh, this is a page. A page is going to be splitted. It's going to have one script. So it's more like now a page you can preload on click or whatever. So like all of these are more on the framework side.
Actually, there was one thing I was wondering about this whole preloading thing because I was thinking if you, isn't that annoying if you're, I don't know, on a tight data plan or something and it tries to predict everything that you want to do and like waste your mobile data? Is it?
But that doesn't happen on mobile. So like I think the data plans like mobile doesn't have kind of this mobile like mouse detection, right? You need to tap. So and then the tapping is as well like the user interaction is as close as the navigation. So that's not on mobile. I think those optimizations are kind of like disabled, right? But by the platform, not by you. Yeah.
Because you could do some stuff, right? Like if you had a paginated thing or whatever, you could already preload maybe
Yep.
the next page and stuff, and that you don't have to hover anything, right?
I used to work at Typeform, and Typeform is kind of like this forum where the experience is very important and the data and those optimizations at scale are insanely popular, right? Like as soon as you like we used to calculate when you were almost finishing writing the answer, loading the next question or loading the next thing. So like all this pagination optimization over time, when you have this core product, like when it's customer based, those optimizations are very, very common.
Now, that sounds really cool. Like to take one thing that, you just optimize the shit out of, right? And it's like,
Yep.
maybe instead of adding a million features that all half work with some LLM, you just do one thing really well. That sounds quite nice. So you said you're not quite done, but when it's done, then that thing is just strictly better than Next.js and all that kind of stuff, because your server can have multiple threads and it's fast and it's no Node.js, right? So
Yep.
that's the OCaml killer feature, right? Okay.
Technically, absolutely. My hot take from before, not a chance. I mean, like in Next.js, like if you wrote like if now you open I don't know LLM and you're like install Stripe and then you're so annoyed by Stripe and you say no delete Stripe at I don't know lemon squeeze or whatever. Like I know it's not real because they bought each other, but this is it's fine. Like if you say to the LLM change one for another, Next.js ecosystem is like this for a human and for a LLM. And in OCaml, that's probably not going to be true. You're gonna have your own endpoint, your own appers, and blah, blah, blah. So
What's after that? Like when you finish that, is there any plans to just step away from React and have something special? Like it's already if if you don't have to convince React TypeScript people to come to React OCaml, there is room to have something of your own. Is there plans for something like this?
it is for sure. Like I always dream about, not dream is not the word, but like as soon as I get out of, like as soon as they fire me or I have like some free time, I'm gonna write my own UI library. That that of course like it would live with these patterns in mind. But I think React is a good ecosystem still.
Mm.
But yeah, of course, like if I want to control, like as soon as I have control of every layer of the from the server to the client, the only bit of that I don't own is React. So replacing that part
Mm-hmm.
feels small. It's not really small, but it is the
Mm-hmm.
the weakest link for maybe better integration or maybe faster or maybe like some patterns that we have not
Mm-hmm.
thought. It is on my kind of like a career plan, if that makes sense. I know at some point I know I'm gonna tackle this problem, and I'm knowledge enough, I think, that
Mm-hmm.
I can do a good job.
I don't know if it's called like that, like the FFI story in OCaml. So can
Hmm.
you use C stuff, or like what can you?
You can bind to C pretty easily. Part of the build system it's using kind of like compile C and checks against that, so that's pretty good. For Melange, the FFI is against JavaScript, so it goes you can bind to JavaScript. If you're familiar to Elm ports, it has nothing to do with that. It's more like you can bind to values, you can bind to functions. So it's more like tight integration. So I remember in Elm, for example, you wanted to have like an editor, a fancy editor. You need to write everything in Elm. In Melange, you can use Slate.js. I think I know it's or Prose Mirror. I know that there's like two big libraries that I actually bind in my previous time. So you can have this code running underneath, and you have like access to all the ecosystem as you were writing JavaScript.
It's quite similar in PureScript.
I think it's quite similar, yeah.
Yeah, in PureScript, you just have this function. I want this function. You just use it. You just need to add a type or guess the type, and as precise as you want. You can say like, "Oh, this is just random fucking JSON."
So I think that's why Elm didn't like that, right? Because you could just type the wrong type and then nothing is safe anymore. And I don't know about Elm ports, but I've just heard that it is pretty painful to just use something else. But the reason is that it gives you, what was it, like 0 runtime exceptions or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think it's a the hard hard trade-off to make. But if you are Elm, you can make it. I think Elm has done a few of those and have paid well for them, like technically. But of course, you lose speed, which for some reason, like before AI, speed was the one of the most important reasons to choose one ecosystem or another. So
I mean, just for me personally, it's very nice to be able to FFI stuff, because even with a lot of LLM credits, I kind of re-implement the whole word, and it's very nice for me to be able to just use this, like you say, right? Like something like Code Mirror, Prose Mirror, whatever. I couldn't write that myself, right? So even if I wanted, so
for example, like we had an implementation of the popover, like this popover that you can over or click and then have popover for popover, and then their size needs to take account, also mobile, the border, like all these events. And we had our own implementation. Of course, buggy, right? Like, of course, it's very buggy. And then you look into JavaScript and there's like two guys who has put all his life into these libraries that are like super cute. They have documentation, like that there's like products, that they are truly like documentation is better. Like the popover documentation is probably better than I don't know Melange documentation. Like it's like they put hundreds of hours. You install that, zero bugs. Like everything is kind of solved. So not binding that, it's a mistake. I think for a company that does the web.
Yeah, we talked about property-based testing last time. And to me, you've heard about this, right? And to me, it's like all these JavaScript libraries. Because if you say that to somebody who's very much into Haskell, they're like, why would I want to do that? Why would I use something that's untyped? And how do I know it works? And so on. And to me, it's always like the fact that everybody uses that means it's kind of like property-based tested in production, right? Because so
At
many
scale, no?
people,
Yeah.
they just find the bugs, right? Like, don't be so obnoxious, right? Like it's.
I mean, it's the other way, Like if you have millions of users, then yes, Like I think the
Yeah.
balance, like the scale gets over. Yeah.
Do you have any PureScript questions?
Like I have not heard yet a drama for PureScript. So I know that every community has some sort of drama. So what's the drama? Why I'm not writing PureScript?
It's a real drama in that the sense is just nobody barely left, right? So it's just very few people these days, and I think it has to do. It's similar. I think very similar to the OCaml thing, right? Like there was, although I mean you had the drama because wasn't even Facebook using it at some point, or was kind of involved, right?
I mean,
So
the whole drama that they mentioned with the whole buckle script, right? That the forks and people wanted to go this way and that way. So that's the drama. I think the thing with drama, for the drama, you need social capital. Like if you have a lot of investment, if you have something happening, the people come, the psychopaths come, and they want to exploit and use it. Like people come and say, I want to be leader in here. I want to do this. And the thing is, there's not much to exploit in PureScript. That's
right.
Like when I was making a video about PureScript overview, I said, "Here's the Discord. People are friendly and nice, but if you're an asshole, don't join." And then one person's like, "That doesn't sound like a welcoming community." Well, like, yeah, that's the whole point. Like, if you're an asshole, don't come, and that's fine. It is welcoming.
Yeah, but that
so it is similar to OCaml, I think. But I think OCaml is like a little bit more spread. So you have like big players, like big companies that move the ecosystem forward. So that's always like decent movement, enough to have drama. So I would say if there's no drama, I think that is scary for a company or for But again, like you have these passionate people behind that are really smart and they drive for me this mission. So I do appreciate that. So I believe that Pushki has some part of the cake, even though it's tiny, but there's someone enjoying and someone working on that. So that's amazing.
Yeah, that's the good part, right? Is that sometimes when I also like maybe I'm trying to use Next.js from PureScript or whatever, something else, and I join a non-PureScript Discord, and you try to ask a question, and they're already, they have all these like forum things and so on, so it's super impersonal, and you're really lucky if you get an answer, and then you check whatever everybody else is asking, and you're like, wow, you couldn't like read the landing page until the end, or like what's the problem? So then you understand why they can't just take everybody's questions. So that's another thing that I find nice about these niche things. It's like you say, you have these nice people, you go there and they're like, I don't know, if you hire them as consultants, they should be super expensive, but they just take their free time and they explain the stuff to you, right? And you're like, well, okay, I don't quite get it, but I'm going to sit down and try to get it. And thank you very much, right? So that part is nice, but yeah, but it is true that, I mean, there could have been some drama, I guess, but I think the only negative things that happen is that maintainers kind of burn out after a while, right? So they could just kind of step down from doing things.
It's funny because I did that twice. So went to a React conference and explained more or less my work, which is like start saying, this is OCaml, this is not like, if you are sleepy, just like keep sleeping. Like that's like if you are not interested, just like sorry, like that. Like in this conference, somebody needs to come and needs to say weird things. It's me. But there's this thing that so I give this presentation into kind of the audience that is more like TypeScript and JavaScript. But when you left the room, there's like 10 people, 20 people that came to you and say, this is the best thing I ever see. Like there's some room, like our, maybe there's like 600 people. There's like 10 that comes to you to say,
Nice.
please, please, please sit down with me later. You need to, and I think that's super fun. That's still really really valuable because you're solving, like as I said, no, like if you have this particular problem, you see it as a 10x library or you see it as a 10x solution, and that people are hooked. Like I think it's what hooked me, and I probably what hooked you as well. That when you solve exactly your problems and you see the scaling, and you are like, why nobody else sees it this way, then you're ready. Like you are super deep. You are in the second Mona tutorial, first paper reading algebraic effects. Like you are super deep into the thing. And for some, like for people who like to learn and go deep, it's the one of the best things that can happen in your software career. But yeah, I'm sorry, like you only gonna choose this path, no? So like you're gonna appreciate PureScript, Elm, you're gonna appreciate OCaml. So jobs are suddenly, I know, a third of I know, a tenth of what you can do. So
I think it's pretty good. Like, I don't know, a week ago I didn't know nothing about OCaml, and I looked a bit at your videos on the weekend, and we talk now. I'm like, okay, I know a lot. There is some stuff.
learning the language itself can be good, and like of course compared to if you look it from another language, so if you know PureScript, you know OCaml, you're gonna feel at home. Learning the differences, why this OCaml is this way and why Haskell is the other way. I think there's some beauties, there's some learnings there that I have been. Yeah, I find it passionate. I find it cool. It's not everybody cup of tea, but I do find it interesting.
Yeah, I'm also curious. Like right now, I have kind of, I mentioned before, not like a midlife crisis with the languages and stuff, but I've
Hmm.
been building my identity around functional programming. I'm not a fan of labels and identities, and it's kind of one
Hmm.
of the things that I had for a while, and I've never been called out for other people, but for myself, I always think about, oh, I don't like labels, but I say functional programming. And
Right.
recently, I started to think about like, what does it even mean? Like, I look at the Elixir; it's a functional language on the Wikipedia, but there's
Yep.
something there that doesn't suit me at all. Something that I look at it's getting new updates and things into directions that I like and want with
Hmm.
types. And I'm like, am I type functional programmer? It's still a label, still not sure. We talked multiple times with multiple people about enums, and we also mentioned it today, like proper ADTs plus pattern matching.
Hmm.
Something really good, something that you really want, something that C and C++ don't have, something that Go
Yeah.
and TypeScript don't have. But for example, Zeek, people who are not fans of functional programming explicitly have, and it looks pretty good. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? What am I looking at?
Yeah.
And then you look at all the, and it's also like syntax and languages, and we talk about how tools don't matter, but you look at all of those and you explore this, like what I want, what I need, what I'm looking for, and it's just a tool and it's just fun. I'm not getting paid for this in my free
Yeah.
time, but it's interesting to explore and see what is it that I want, what is it what I need, what makes my code better, what makes it readable, what is it that I learned in university and keep carrying around as like Pascal or Java baggage, or what's actually out there, because people are still exploring. The languages are mostly, I don't know, like from 90s, right? Most of the
Hmm.
languages we do are from 90s. There are a couple of new languages, something to explore and look as well. So I agree. It's when people just say, oh, this language is whatever, I don't want to look at this, I just use my stuff. I'm like, yeah, but don't you want to try and know
Yep.
what you're missing? Or like what's, as you always mentioned with TypeScript and React, like you don't know what you don't know unless you explore and take a look.
What's your view on that, Mark?
I mean, I'm also kind of maybe I think even a bit before Jay already. I sometimes like this low level stuff. I'm not good at it though, so it's kind of a bit weird, right? It's like I follow some of that Twitter stuff and I have some idea, and I think allocators are really cool and all that stuff, but I just never use it myself. So
Hmm.
that's weird because I mean, I think it would be fine if it was about, I don't know, playing the trumpet, right? Because I obviously don't play it, but like, yeah, I could just sit down and try this. So I think I've tried a few times, but then usually I'm also like, so I'm not a person that likes stuff like Advent of Code, for example, where it's just
Hmm.
do this puzzle that I tell you to do. So I much prefer coming up with my own stuff that I want to build and fix and do. And I find that rarely is it something where I really need that crazy performance thing where that makes a big difference. So even, I don't know, if you try to make some games, then I wouldn't write, the GPU layer or whatever. So even then, right, like people write their game logic in Lua or some other scripting language. So even then, where people would say, oh, it's super important here. Well, if you don't do it all by hand, back to that whole FFI story again, right? Like, do I
Yep.
get anything done if I write my own engine? And yeah, I'm not that. Yeah, I can't. I like seeing stuff at some point and not just maybe the hex dump of something. So, anyways,
Yeah.
so I like that stuff. I think I'm also like Jay in that I like types, and I like the part where
Yep.
you think about things like, is this type representing what it should be representing correctly, right? So does it have the right cardinality, right? Or can I put more stuff in there, right? Like whenever I see string, I'm like, oh yeah, I'd like to actually write a test that puts, all of Shakespeare into your stupid string, right? Because it's a string and then deal with it, right? In that sense, yes. But what I think is interesting also is that there is this trend nowadays, right? So I think 10 years ago, maybe just being into Haskell and all the functional programming thing was kind of en vogue, right? Like people were doing that and that was cool and everybody was doing their microservices and whatever. And that died down, right? It's just not popular anymore.
Yep.
So it was much easier when it was popular to also be into that. And now sometimes I guess you get that feeling of like, well, everybody moved on. Why haven't I moved on? But then the thing is that like I see they moved on. They moved on to like shittier versions of the same thing, not to something where I feel like, oh yeah, that is obviously better, right? So maybe like OCaml
That is true.
or whatever. And
That
then
is true.
I'm just wondering, why do people not care anymore? Like why in general, and you question the whole world. Maybe it's a midlife crisis thing about
Yeah, it's
like,
really like I think I'm in the same boat.
why don't people want things to be good, right? Because all around you see this whole entitification thing, right? And I've read a thing recently about everybody complains about subscriptions, but now you have these kind of layers of subscriptions, right? So you get the subscription, but inside of the subscription you can get another one to maybe remove the ads here and then get another, and it's just everything becomes so horrible that I feel like I'm not convinced just by this thing of like, I'll just be pragmatic and it doesn't matter, right? So even for the LLMs, I'm not convinced, because there, I think by definition, it's like you said, right? Like tell it do some Stripe thing, it's going to write you a little next service, and it will go to some kind of average best practice thing, right? But it won't go to the best thing. But then try to find a job independently of language where somebody pays you for doing it extremely well over just making it work somehow. But I think you got lucky.
If I can,
Yeah,
it's true. If I can kind of see it in my view is that I don't like labels neither, but I do appreciate kind of like the craft. So I do appreciate when something is reliable and has good quality. I want to learn how that's been done. No, like how are they? Because making it work, I think, is kind of easy. Making it maintainable is kind of like a dream goal. And but when there's something reliable, fast, like when you have like all of them, it's like okay, regardless of the language, regardless of the tooling, or what are the principles that make it true in Go and OCaml and Haskell? Like there's some subset of the world of the code of on coding that the patterns behind them they must be similar. Like there are some things that are true regardless of the language. No, a good test or very like if you're writing a compiler, you have a lot of unit tests. That's how it is. Like if you don't want to write unit tests and you have a compiler, I'm sorry, you are gonna have a shitty quality product for sure. Like I can bet money on this. Similar, if you want to have like a lot of good user experience, you're gonna have a lot of users. Like there's things that are still gonna be true. So all these patterns and learning how to apply those patterns, I think it's regardless the tool, regardless of OCaml. Even though I'm super passionate about OCaml, I think you can write very good functional principles in Go, probably to say a language that I have never written. But like you can I don't know, but you can probably module things and have some good interfaces and some layers and some like the responsibilities. Like regardless if you're doing OP or no, or your state is inside or outside, or the contract is here and there. Like you can make good software regardless. Follow the quality. I think the quality is not a label. Quality is more like, oh, you do you like your tools to work? In functional programming, I think we fall in love with tools. So if you like, I don't know. I like running, so my shoes are very good, and my watch is very. I like the quality. So like things that are in the real world, I feel principled. I feel I follow the same thing everywhere. So
Mhm.
that's my recommendation. I don't know. I don't know if it lands anywhere, but I feel tranquility. I feel happiness thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense and it lands. It's kind of the low level system programming. That's kind of what it is a bit. They talk about qualities, they talk about stuff like this, and
Mm.
function programming is a bit of this. But in both communities, both worlds, there are both people who care about this and people who don't care about this, and the quality what I care about and the craft of it all. But at the same time, the craft of is of fun. I also don't want to grind and be like these people who say, "Oh, I fucking love C. I've been doing C for 40 years." It
Right.
sucks, but I kind of have the Stockholm syndrome of it. It's like, no, there
Yeah.
is, sure, you can get quality if you're really particular and really precise and really, 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 but I also want to have a bit of fun and just
Yeah.
still motivated and stuff like this. So this kind of, it's a balance of both, and it's lacking in the world in either way.
Yep. I think
Yeah.
join OCaml as the last bullet, I guess.
Do you have any parting thoughts for people who want to try OCaml? Maybe try Melange? What's the best way to try? Maybe for people who from front end world, people from the back end world, maybe both. Like,
Yeah, two paths. One is if you know frontend and you know React, there's a Melange book. So there's a book that goes through to chapters to you write a little bit of application, goes step by step,
nice.
and that's kind of like very front-endy world. If you are a backend or more the language or more like in the CLI systems programming, whatever, there's a kernel book. It's a videos. It's a guy who is super good teacher because like in OCaml, everybody is a good teacher. So like all these superstars in OCaml like are super good teachers. And there's one guy who during COVID recorded videos because of course they were not classes, and the videos are super good. And I learned like I knew OCaml and I wrote it for 1 year, and then I watched the videos and said, this is the clarity they needed. So I truly recommend that one. It got a little bit into CS, so it's a little bit like maybe a little bit lead code, as you said, Mark, the part that you don't like. Maybe you can skip that part, but it gets you the interaction from A to Z.
Cool.
I,
And
I
it's a
can
free
share the link
course on
later.
YouTube.
It's a free course, yeah.
And the academia part that you were saying, I guess it's like, is it like French universities or who's behind the academia stuff?
Yeah, INRIA is the university that has created OCaml and has a team of people that are both tutoring many papers of OCaml, but as well as pushing the language. Like many companies, many universities are teaching OCaml. So the OCaml pool of developers is increasing a lot. So yeah, like I think interns in OCaml, they are some. So like they appear and they are. I think we hire a couple of those interns that are extremely talented.
Have you hired people from TypeScript, React world to
Ah,
transition to
yeah,
OCaml, Melange, and how hard was it for them? Do you have any experience with this? Should have asked
yeah,
it way before.
yeah. Fine. Like my colleague, so like who used to be my boss, he now moved to kind of like another team. But he onboarded 5 or 6 people that were like from JavaScript into this world, and so he has all the tricks. Like we have some documents to guide people, and it was very easy. Like I would say, like surprisingly easy. Of course, we hire people that are willing to learn or are willing to put a little bit of effort into getting to your like out of your comfort zone, saying, "Oh, I loved Elm. I played with Elm. What is this reason thing?" And then technical interest is there. But if you hire these people, the path is very easy, very easy.
Nice. Cool. Thank you.